The final farewell episode of MASH has aired on the networks. The famous 4077th is now relegated to the endless spin-offs and syndications.
People all over America celebrated this final MASH tonight.
MASH absurd facts you never knew. What if I told you that one of the most beloved actors on MASH spent 11 straight years hiding one of his own hands from the camera, that a real wildfire once burned down the actual set and got written into the finale, and that two men who played the exact same character died of the exact same thing, one single day apart? MASH ran for 11 years, won more than a dozen Emmys, and closed out with the single most watched episode in American television history. But underneath all of that is a mountain of strange, true trivia most fans have never heard. Stick around, because by the end of this video you're going to see the show completely differently. Let's start with Radar. If you rewatch old episodes, you will notice his left hand barely appears clearly on camera. That was not a directing quirk. Gary Berghoff, the actor behind the role, was born with a rare condition called Poland syndrome, which left 3 fingers on his left hand noticeably smaller than the fingers on his right. For the entire run of the series, Berghoff quietly kept that hand out of frame, tucked behind a clipboard or angled away from the lens. Most viewers never noticed, which was exactly the point. Radar's teddy bear became one of the most famous props in the show's history, eventually earning a spot at the Smithsonian Institution. According to accounts from people connected to that exhibit, when the collection first went on display right after the series ended, staff reportedly could not immediately track down the actual bear, a strange little footnote most retrospectives never mention. Here is one of the wildest legal stories connected to the entire series. Wayne Rogers, who played Trapper John McIntyre for the first 3 seasons, walked away in a way that should have been impossible. He had objected early on to a vague morals clause buried inside his contract, one broad enough that the studio could suspend or fire an actor for behaving in whatever it decided counted as immoral. Rogers refused to sign it, yet production moved forward anyway, and nobody ever circled back to fix the paperwork. When he decided he had enough of watching his character get pushed aside behind Alan Alda's rising star, he simply left. CBS reportedly considered suing him for breach of contract, only to discover there was no contract to breach. He walked away completely free, at a time when actors just did not get to do that. The cast also largely avoided wearing their actual army boots during filming. The boots were stiff and loud on the soundstage floor. So many scenes were framed from the waist up specifically to keep footwear out of the shot, with sneakers quietly doing the job underneath those uniforms instead. Once the cameras stopped rolling, a different kind of competition took over the set around a poker table, where Loretta Swit reportedly built a reputation as a surprisingly tough opponent. Alan Alda directed 32 episodes on top of acting in every single one of the show's 251 episodes, something no other cast member managed. What barely anyone remembers is how close Alda came to never playing Hawkeye at all. According to widely repeated accounts, he did not formally commit to the role until just hours before filming began on the very first episode, which makes his eventual 5 Emmy wins for acting, writing, and directing on the same series feel almost impossible in hindsight. To this day, Alda remains the only performer in television history to win competitive Emmys in all 3 of those categories for a single show. Mike Farrell, who joined later as BJ Honeycutt, earned a quieter reputation of his own, built around napping between takes, something he later attributed to the sheer grind of the shooting schedule. David Ogden Stiers, who played the meticulous Major Charles Winchester, reportedly once nearly stormed off set convinced the crew had pranked him by hiding his sandwich, only to realize he had left it on a prop tray himself. Loretta Swit almost left the show entirely during its early seasons, worried Margaret Houlihan would stay trapped as a flat comic stereotype forever. Instead of quitting, she reportedly pushed hard to add real depth and vulnerability to the character over time, and that persistence is a big part of why Margaret eventually shed the Hot Lips nickname in later seasons and was simply addressed as Margaret or Major. Now for one of the strangest true stories connected to this show, and it involves fire, twice. In October of 1982, an actual wildfire tore through the outdoor set at Malibu Creek State Park while production was still active. Rather than shut everything down, the writers folded that real disaster directly into the finale storyline, explaining the destruction on screen as enemy shelling that forced the camp to evacuate. Then, decades later in November of 2018, the Woolsey fire tore through that exact same stretch of the park, this time for real, with no riders softening anything. Initial reports described the remaining set pieces as destroyed, though a later visit found many of the rusted vehicles and the replica signpost had actually survived, even as the surrounding land was scorched black. The trail leading to the site did not survive as easily, since storm runoff after the fire washed out a concrete crossing, and volunteers eventually had to build a temporary bridge years later so fans could keep making the hike out. That same period around Season 8 also marked a deliberate shift in tone, with writers describing a conscious decision to slow the joke-per-minute pace and lean more into the emotional toll of a prolonged war. One of the most talked-about moments in the show is the death of Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake in the episode Abyssinia. Henry. Producers reportedly kept the ending secret from most of the cast until just before filming the final scene, so when Radar walked in to deliver the news, the stunned silence on everyone's faces was a genuinely real reaction, captured in a single take with no rehearsal. Alan Alda reportedly pushed the cast to study real surgical technique and authentic medical practices from the Korean War era, an idea that came from him personally rather than any studio mandate, which helps explain why the operating room scenes still feel convincing decades later. Before Harry Morgan became beloved as the steady Colonel Potter, he had already appeared once earlier in the series playing a completely different, unstable visiting general. That single guest appearance was reportedly memorable enough that producers brought him back the very next season as a permanent replacement, an unusual case of a guest actor returning in a totally different regular role and having it land seamlessly with audiences. Several cast members actually brought real military service to their roles. Jamie Farr and Alan Alda both served in the Army, with Alda spending time with the Army Reserve in Korea and Farr touring through the region during his own enlistment. Wayne Rogers had served in the Navy as a ship navigator, and Mike Farrell had served as a Marine. Farr reportedly wore his own actual dog tags on camera throughout much of the series, a small detail carrying his real name and information that most viewers never noticed. To save money on the very first episode, producers reportedly reused actual aerial and helicopter footage originally shot for Robert Altman's 1970 MASH film. Since the same studio owned both productions, this was entirely legal and considerably cheaper than filming new material, quietly linking the movie and the television show in a way most viewers never noticed. Some trivia around this show has taken on a life of its own without actually being true, and it is worth clearing one up directly. A frequently repeated claim states that a certain board game once printed a trivia fact saying Hawkeye only ever saluted once in the entire series. Fans who went back through the actual episodes found this does not hold up, since Hawkeye is shown saluting on multiple occasions, a good reminder that even officially published trivia can get basic facts wrong. According to some retellings, the role of Hawkeye had reportedly been floated to a handful of other actors before Alan Alda ultimately landed the part, with Robert Redford's name occasionally mentioned among those said to have passed. That detail has never been confirmed anywhere near as solidly as Alda's own last-minute signing, so it is worth treating as an unverified legend rather than settled history. Only 3 characters actually made it from the original 1970 film all the way through to the television finale in some form: Hawkeye Pierce, Margaret Houlihan, and Father Mulcahy, each played by an entirely different actor in the movie compared to the show. Riding the massive popularity of the series, producers eventually launched spin-offs too. Trapper John, MD, became the most successful by far, running for years despite Wayne Rogers declining to reprise the role, while After MASH folded after its second season and a third attempt centered on Radar barely got off the ground. Gary Berghoff had reportedly told producers he wanted to leave during Season 7, and writers had already begun shaping his departure, only for scheduling issues to push it into the following season instead, which may explain why Radar's goodbye carries a slightly different emotional weight than the episodes around it. In that same stretch, CBS reportedly told Alan Alda that the surreal Season 8 episode Dreams was too strange for the show. Alda apparently pushed back hard, arguing the psychological toll of combat deserved honest treatment even if it broke sitcom convention. CBS eventually relented, and Dreams went on to earn Alda a Primetime Emmy for directing. Season 8 also included one of the show's more heavily debated storylines, an attempt by several characters to adopt a Korean infant. Multiple cast members, including Mike Farrell, later described that storyline as a misstep, feeling it oversimplified a genuinely difficult real-world issue. It is a good reminder that even a groundbreaking show did not always get everything right. Corporal Maxwell Klinger's cross-dressing scheme to fake his way out of the army became one of the show's signature running jokes for years, though the writers reportedly moved away from leaning on it so heavily once Klinger evolved into a more responsible figure within the camp later in the series. Jamie Farr and the writing team later confirmed that shift was intentional, transforming Klinger gradually from pure comic relief into a genuinely capable soldier by the time the series ended. Now here is one of the strangest true coincidences connected to this entire franchise, and it has nothing to do with the show itself. Henry Blake was originally played by Roger Bowen in the 1970 film before McLean Stevenson took over the role for television. In February of 1996, the two men died one day apart, both from heart attacks. Stevenson passed away on February 15th, and Bowen passed away the following day. Two actors who had portrayed the exact same character years apart left this world within 24 hours of each other, and nobody has ever offered anything beyond coincidence to explain it. The series finale, Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, remains one of the most watched single episodes in American television history, drawing an average audience of roughly 106 million viewers over its 2.5-hour runtime in February of 1983. Streets in many cities reportedly emptied out that night as people gathered around televisions to watch the 4077th say goodbye for good. Across its full run, the series collected 14 Emmy Awards along with a Peabody Award. It is worth sitting with just how strange that legacy really is. The actual Korean War lasted barely 3 years in real history, yet the television series exploring it stretched across 11 full seasons, meaning the fictional 4077 spent nearly 4 times longer on screen than the real conflict it depicted ever actually lasted. From a hidden hand nobody noticed to a wildfire that reshaped its own ending, and from an unsigned contract to an eerie coincidence connecting two actors who never even worked together, MASH turned out to have just as many unbelievable stories behind the camera as it ever told in front of it. Which one of these surprised you the most? Let me know down in the comments, and if you enjoyed digging into the real history behind one of television's greatest shows, stick around for more.